Hello quilty friends and welcome back to my channel. My name's Rachel and I make videos about quilting and my creative life. And recently I've had a lot of questions about what method I use for basting a quilt and if I could do a video on that. So that's exactly what I'm going to show you today. However, I did need to get a little bit creative in how I was going to show you, because I usually baste my quilts on the floor in any carpet area that is large enough to accommodate the quilt. And frankly, nobody needs to see me on video from that angle basting a quilt on the floor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I baste a mini quilt. It's the exact same method and I'll talk you through it, but you know, you don't have to see me in that angle on the floor. And that way I thought I could make the video that everyone wants to see how I baste a quilt. So let's get into that. So the quilt that I'm actually going to be basting today is going to be a mini quilt. Now, if you watched my most recent video on finishing the cushions, I had this panel in the video and I said, do you think this would be a better mini quilt or a better cushion? And it was a unanimous decision really that it would make a better mini quilt to go on the wall, because this is my brand new craft room and I would like to cover this wall here behind me in mini quilts. So this will be the first one. But I have finished the other cushion that was in the video that I said that I hadn't finished. So aren't I doing ever so well with finishes recently compared to how I used to be? So here is the cushion. It finishes at around 20 inches and this was an English paper piecing mandala, and then I've just got cream on the back. So like I said, the method is exactly the same, but this would be on the carpet. So this is my backing fabric that I just cut with a pair of scissors to be about 4 inches bigger on either side. You can get away with 2 or 3 inches, but I always trim the excess off and it just goes into my scraps. And then the first step that I use is when I'm doing it down on the carpet, I will use duct tape, and I use small strips, probably about 4 inches long, and I tape at intervals. The tape that I use is this ultra tape, but my partner has said to me that it's a very expensive tape because it's so sticky, but any duct tape will do. I don't find that the brown parcel tape does a good enough job. I'm going to use washi tape here to demonstrate it on the desk. So I'd stick it like this and I work across the one side. I don't do one long piece, you just don't need to. Gives you a little bit better control if you just work in smaller sections as well. So I do the one side and then I go across and I smooth it out. You can't smooth it too much when you're on the carpet. So what I do is when I put the tape here, I stick it to the fabric first and then I just give everything a pull so it's taut, and then that'll smooth it out. I find the tape is essential to avoid puckers on the back. Since I've started doing this method, I haven't had any puckers on the back. I did used to baste my quilts on the bed, but you couldn't really tape it in place firmly, so I always got puckers on the back. But this way, with the tape, you're avoiding that. So I do 2 opposite sides and then I just shift to the side pieces. If you find that you're actually creating wrinkles, you can just adjust it. It's a bit difficult here because this is a really slippy surface with the desk, but you won't find that happens if you have carpet. If you have hard floors, you might find the same is happening here, but you just keep adjusting. You can imagine if you don't tape it, all of this is going to move as you're trying to baste. So smooth it out. And you can put a nice bit of tension on at this point. So the washi tape and the desk combination isn't the best combination, so you just have to trust me that it does work. So then at this point I would get my wadding and I put it down. Again, the wadding is bigger than the quilt, but usually I do it smaller than the backing. I've done it quite tight on this one, but usually it would go closer to the edge. And then when I'm on the floor, I fold it back in half, the wadding, and then I use a spray adhesive. So this is 505 spray, temporary spray adhesive. I never find that this gums up my machine, doesn't affect hand quilting, anything like that. This is my preferred method. So I just give it a light baste. And what I would do is I would work in a big section, maybe about 10 inches, spray it, and then I pull the wadding down, smooth it out onto the bit that's been sprayed, fold it back again, and then work on the next 10-inch section, and just keep working in sections. Here, because it's only a small quilt, I could just do it in 2 halves. You fold this back. I always spray it onto the material rather than onto the wadding. And when you're doing a full quilt, you might need a bit more spray than what I'm using there. Then just smooth everything out, and then you can introduce your quilt top. And then, so I would put the quilt top down, and then you just repeat the same thing. So you'd fold it back, usually around in half, work in about 10-inch sections, spraying. And then just using a smoothing motion just to smooth it all down. You'll find that the smoothing just completely transforms it. And then depending on the quilt and the circumstances, I will go ahead and use quilt pins. Now, for this one, I don't need to because it's only such a small mini quilt. I would certainly add the quilt pins if I'm going to be hand quilting, because I know that I'll be handling it a lot. It will take me a long time to get it quilted. Or I'd perhaps also use the quilt pins if it was a much larger quilt and I was going to machine quilt it, just because it saves how much spray you need to do. You still need to do a liberal amount of spray adhesive, and then it just means that it will withstand a little bit more rough and tumble, so to speak. So I use these, but I don't put them as close as you would normally. I think it's usually around a hand width, isn't it? So I would usually do maybe about every 6 inches, put a pin in. I also just let the quilt design lead me on where to do the pins. You know, if there's regular intervals where you can put the pins, you know, by all means go ahead. But if you need to be careful with the placement because of how you're going to quilt it, just adjust your pins accordingly. You've got the backup of the spray adhesive, which in itself does last, but I just like the added security, especially because I hand quilt a lot of my quilts. I just like to have the security there because it probably takes me months. So now we can go ahead and just remove all of the tape. The tape doesn't affect the carpet, even with the ultra strong tape that I use, and I have no issues. You will find that it will fray the edge of your fabric, but again, as long as you've left enough of a seam allowance, that won't have an impact. And then obviously the tape is just discarded. And that is how I baste a mini quilt, a full quilt. It's all the same method. So if you'd like to stick around, we'll get quilting this and I'll show you it completely finished. But let me just give you a look at the back before we do that so you can see that there's no puckers or anything. There we go. I always find it's a good idea to check the back of the quilt before you start quilting. I have got some bumps here, but it's just because the seams on the back of this are so bulky because it was foundation paper pieced. So yeah, always best to check the back because you can always smooth it out again if needs be. That's what I used to have to do when I basted it on the bed. I'd have to do the one side, flip it over, and then basically redo the whole basting, but the duct tape method works great. So for this project I've opted to quilt it with a cream thread, just because that background fabric is a cream rather than a white, so I didn't want the thread to stand out too much. And I'm going to quilt it in a grid pattern, and it ended up being about 1/2 inch apart, the quilting line, so it was quite densely quilted, but I just love the texture that that creates. And you will find that it will give a little bit of stiffness to your quilt, which is what you'll want when you're hanging it on the wall. You want it to have a little bit of body and essentially to be able to support itself to prevent anything from curling or flopping over. I always use my walking foot on my sewing machine for when I'm doing quilting like this, and I start my quilting lines at the edge of the quilt but starting at the centre point, so working my way across each line of the quilt, working my way out in either direction, and then once I'd done all of that I then started working in the opposite direction. I don't know about you, but sometimes I find the back of the quilt even more satisfying than the front. You get a really nice texture on the back, especially if you've used a plain fabric, you can really see the quilting. For the binding of this quilt, I opted to use a yellow binding to really pull that yellow that I've used in the centre, because I think the yellow is the most less used colour that I've put in this quilt out of all of them, so it really helped match the centre and pull it out. Now, if you've watched any of my videos in the past, you'll know that I usually like quite a wide binding. I'll often attach it to the front, even with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so it's nice and thick on the front and then on the back as well. And I usually cut this at 3 inches. But for a mini quilt, the best tip that I can give you is that you actually want a thin binding, both on the front. The back doesn't really matter so much, but definitely on the front, to match the small patchwork on the front, because a thick binding just wouldn't match the whole vibe. You want the binding to be proportionate to the rest of the quilt. So I'm now at the point where I need to start hanging them on the wall, and I'm a bit unsure about whether I want to commit to hanging them, because I've had my sister around to show her the craft room since, and she says she thinks this wall looks really nice just as it is, plain and open. So I've got 2 here that I wanted to put on the wall, and I think I'm going to put this one next to this picture. I know you can't see that, and then I might put this one in the middle maybe. And I know I'm going to get asked and crucified for how I hang up my wall hangings, but I use the Command Hook Velcro strips. I actually get these ones. These are just picture hanging strips, but they're the same thing, you know, when they've got the Velcro. And I get these because they're much cheaper. I get them from B&M in the UK. And for these, I will actually cut them in half. So they are a good renter-friendly way of doing them, but that's not the reason why I like them. I just like how flat you can get them to the wall with this method. Because when you have a hanging rod and things, you always got a little bit sticking out at the top. So I'm just going to take this one, cut it in half, so that will make 2. Do we need instructions on cutting these in half? I don't think we do. You can get the smaller ones if you buy the actual command strips, but they don't do smaller ones in these ones. And I just put them on all 4 corners. So just like that. And I've never noticed, to be honest, any effect on the back of the fabric, but I have only been using this method for a couple of years. So proceed with caution if you are worried, but for me, I don't find it to be an issue or anything like that. And to be honest, you find that the adhesive sticks to the wall better than it does the fabric. It's only ever such a light grip onto the fabric. You can pull it off very easily, so you don't need to worry about it being on there forever. So you'll have to let me know what you think about the picture hanging on the wall. Now, it's obviously not central, is it? Whereas before the picture was in the centre, but now I've put the other one on. But I would like to cover this whole wall in mini quilts. But do you think that would make the room look too small? Is it still nice having that wall blank? Please let me know in the comments. Give me a vote of confidence for my ideas for just adding more mini quilts around the place. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and until the next time I see you, you take care and happy quilting.